everyone, it's Erin Peliquin from Digital Photography for Moms. In today's video, I am going to show you how to use the Rustic Chic actions in Photoshop Elements. If you use full Photoshop, I've got another video for you to watch. So right now we're looking at Photoshop Elements 2018, and you can see up here that I am in the expert editing mode. So that's where you'll need to start in order to use actions as well. The first thing you'll need to do is download them from my website and then install them. When you download them, they're going to look something like this. You can see that I'm on a Mac, and Macs put their files in the Downloads folder after downloading from websites. Most PCs do the same thing, but everyone can configure their computer differently. So you'll need to know where download files go on your computer. And you'll simply click on a link from an email, and this file will download directly into wherever you've configured your computer to save downloads. It will be in a zipped or compressed format with this zip at the end of the file name. So you'll need to unzip it in order to find the actions. So I'm going to double click on the file, and you can see that shortly the unzipped version of the action will appear right there above it. Now, if you can't double click to decompress your files, you might need to right click and find something that says open or unzip or extract. Those are the words you're looking for. All right, so you can see that I've got this uncompressed file and it's waiting for me in my downloads. Now at this point, it's a good idea to copy the action and move it to a different location on your computer, because the downloads is not a good place to store things permanently, right? We usually delete it from time to time. So I am going to right click on this file and select copy. And then I'm going to save it in a permanent location on my hard drive. So I'll right click and select paste. Now, of course, you can copy and paste files in many ways. You can go to the edit menu and select copy. You've got all sorts of options. And so now going to Photoshop Elements, we are going to install the action by clicking right here on the Actions panel. If you don't have the Actions panel displayed, you can grab it from your Windows menu and clicking on the word Actions. I'll click on these three horizontal lines at the top right corner and select Load Actions. And then I will navigate to the permanent location of my action file. I'll select Open, and there it is. That's all it takes to install the action. And you can see that once you've clicked on it, you can scroll up and down. You can also close this folder and open it. And so within this folder are all of the actions. All right, so let's start with a brief overview of the way the actions are arranged. First off, you've got the Style section. And so here you've got 13 or 14 different actions, starting with bright and crisp and ending with darken edges. So these actions add creative looks to your folder. This next one, the Mix and Match Styles, is one that will run all of these actions, and then you can turn them off and on to see which one you like the best or to combine them. The next section is Corrective. So you've got all of these actions that will help you with exposure or with focus and sharpness or with white balance to help you correct the issues that happen on camera. And then finally, I have got all of these actions devoted specifically to whitening and brightening and sharpening eyes. Finally, this last action is only necessary if you have versions of Elements beginning with 14 and going backwards. So essentially 11, 12, 13, and 14, you'll need to use this action, and I'll show you how to use it shortly. All right, so when you run actions, you are generally going to want to start with the corrective section first, especially if you've got a photo like this where I had to darken the subject in order not to overexpose the background. So I knew I'd be able to fix this in editing, and if I hadn't done it, then I wouldn't have any detail on this beautiful grass in the background. So I am going to run this Lighten a Lot action. I'm going to click on it, and then I'm going to press the play button. And you can see that automatically the image is brighter. Now, I want to be able to adjust it, so I'm going to click on my Layers panel, and you can see right here is the new layer that this action created. can turn it off. I can turn it on. I'm actually going to change the way these layers display so that you can see the names better. I moved elements over so that you can see where this panel is when it appears outside of the elements window. So I am going to go to panel options, and I am going to display my thumbnails smaller, and that way you can see the name of the layer. And I'm also going to move this actions panel right over here. Okay, so you can see that I've run the Lighten a lot action, and it's definitely a good change. Here's the before, here's the after, but her face is still darker than I'd like it to be. So this layer is actually at 62% opacity, which means that it's a lower strength than is possible. So to brighten her face further, I can just increase this opacity until I'm happier with the exposure on her face. So here's a before, and here's an after. Now, if I wanted to brighten it even more, I could run this action again and create another layer. But I don't think I need that at this point, so I'm simply going to delete this second layer by dragging it into the trash can. Now, one thing I noticed, let me show you a before here, is that the grass was darker before I lightened it. That's kind of obvious, right? But the great thing about this action is that it has a layer mask right here, which allows me to hide the edit from parts of my photo, like the background. So this layer mask is currently a white box, and anywhere you see white on a layer mask, that means that the edit is showing through to your photo. You can hide the edit with black paint. So if you see a layer mask that's completely black, that means that your edit is invisible until you reveal it in specific places. So I am going to grab my paintbrush right here. I'm going to click on this little icon, which ensures that my colors are black and white. And then I will make black my top color by using this double-headed arrow. Now my brush is too small, so I'm using the square bracket key on my keyboard that faces to the left to make a bigger brush. And I'm just going to paint this black paint over. And you can see what it's doing is adding black to the layer mask and darkening the background. So I'm not actually covering this with black paint. I am just telling the layer mask, hey, this is where I don't want the edit to appear. So that's what we're doing here. So remember, with layer mask, white reveals, black conceals. And now let's look at a before and an after. We've brightened the subject, and that's super. Now, one more thing I'm noticing about this, because my subject was in the shadows, her skin tone is rather cool. So I am going to run Warm Your Tones. I'm going to click on it and press the play button. And again, looking at just her face, actually, to tell you the truth, I don't mind it so much in the background. It warms that up nicely. It is too strong though, so I am going to reduce the opacity just a little bit. So something like that I'm happy with. Now, if you're a more advanced Elements user and you know how to use adjustment layers, you can always double click right here to open up the adjustment layer property. You could brighten your layer, you could change the colors, whatever you want to do. You don't have to know how to do that though in order to use these actions. All right, so let's talk about applying these styles to your photo. In general, when you are using actions in Elements, it's a good idea to flatten your layers. It's not absolutely required, but if you get error messages that give you weird things like couldn't find the background layer, or this program encountered an error, or this edit is not allowed, things like that, you'll want to undo what you did and flatten your layers by right-clicking on any one of your layers and selecting Flatten. So a flattened image only has one layer in the Layers panel, and that layer's name is Background, always. Obviously, you will need to be looking at your Layers panel, which you can access from down there, or from the window menu up here. You can always check or click on Layers right there. Now for this photo, let's do a warm fade action. I'm just going to run this action by clicking on it and pressing the play button. You can see that it created all sorts of new layers over here, and then it zipped them up into a little folder called Warm Fade. So if I like the overall look, but I think it's either too strong or too weak, I can adjust the opacity of the group. So I can bring it up or bring it down. If I wanted maybe a strong opacity, but I wanted to remove it from her skin, I can use this layer mask. So I can grab my brush is set to black, and I could paint over it like that if I wanted to. So that's hiding the edits of this whole entire action from her skin. The other thing I can do is click on this folder to open up the folder and see all the layers that make up the edit. Now, if you have elements 14 and prior, this is where you'll need to use the Open Folder Groups action. You can't just click on a folder in these earlier versions of elements to open the folder. Instead, you're going to have to run this action. So once you go into it, you'll see that we've got a layer that adds clarity to the photo. You can just turn them off and turn them on to understand what they do. So we've got brightening. You can increase the opacity on many layers or decrease the opacity. So just explore and tweak until you get the photo wherever you want it to be. So remember that when you run any action, you are going to be able to, from the style section anyway, you're going to be able to adjust the folder, including its opacity and mask, or the individual layers that go into it. All right, so that's it for this photo. I'm going to go to my photo bin and grab this ocean photo. And I want to show you how this mix and match styles action works. So right there, this mix and match styles action runs all of the actions above. So I'm going to press the play button. And the thing you need to know about this action is that it can be slow. It's performing so many different things, and you can see them all happening in the layers panel. And depending on the kind of computer you have and the version of elements, it might take a really long time. If that's the case, then I suggest that you only use it the first few times just to get familiar with the various looks, and once you know kind of the ones that you tend to use the most often, you won't need to run the mix and match anymore. So you can turn each style off and on by clicking on the eyeball button to see what they do to your photo. And again, you've got the layer, so I'm going to turn this one on. I can reduce the opacity if I want to, and I can paint on the layer mask. I can also open the folder to adjust those underlying layers, just like you could with the single action that you ran. You can combine the layers. So if maybe I wanted to use bright and crisp and then maybe pump it up to it to give me a really vibrant effect, I can do that. So you can turn on as many as you want, or you can have just one at a time that you really tweak. So that's the way you use this mix and match. You'll see that your corrective edits have a mix and match as well that applies all of these layers to your photo. Now the last thing I want to show you is this eyes section. So you can see that you've got your individual actions here, or you've got eye everything. I'm just going to run that. And you can see that I have a folder here. If I turn this folder off and on, my image doesn't change. That means that no edits have been applied to the photo yet. So in order to do anything with this eye action, you do have to open your folder. And again, remember that if you are on an earlier version of Elements, you will need to use this open folder action. You can see once I open it that all of the layers have black layer mask, which means that the effect is completely hidden from our image. You can also see that we've got layers for each individual thing. So let's say that I want to brighten her eyes. I'm going to click on that layer. I want to make sure that the black outline is around the blue outline is around the layer mask. I'm going to zoom into her eyes by typing Command or Control and the equal key on my keyboard. And this action actually selects a white paintbrush for you, so you don't have to do that. So I am just going to paint over her eyes. And then I can turn this layer off and on to see the difference. Now eye bold is going to saturate the iris. So I want my brush to be smaller. I'm clicking on the right facing square bracket key to make that happen. I don't want to paint anywhere else. I don't want to increase the colors that are in the whites of her eye, for example. So I'm just getting the colored parts of her iris. Eye white, of course, is going to brighten the whites of the eye. So I'm painting just carefully in those parts. Now, in most cases, I probably wouldn't need to use all of these layers on every photo, but these are all of the options you might need. So it's okay if you don't paint on every layer mask. Now, the eyeline and lash layer is going to help you add contrast. You need a teeny tiny brush for that. So again, that right facing square bracket key. I like to brush just around the edge of the iris and along the lash line. You want this to be very subtle, not obvious at all. Now, if I were editing a man, I would use even a smaller brush because I don't want it to look like I'm putting eyeliner on him. And finally, just going around the rim here. So now we can use this group folder and turn everything off and on to show you how it works. Now I'm going to zoom out by typing Command or Control and the 0 button. When you finish editing your eyes, you always need to be aware that it's really easy to go overboard. So zoom out to a normal viewing size and then turn your folder off and on. So to me, that looks a little bit fake. So I am going to click on the folder here and reduce the opacity to maybe about 70% or so. So turning it off or on, that looks more believable and natural to me. So that's why we've got this folder with the eye everything, so that you can control the strength of all of the layers at once. All right, now I have gone over to Elements 11. Remember that the prior version of Elements that I was working in was Elements 2018. They look the same, but this is in fact Elements 11. One of the differences is that we do not have the folder controls up here. So let me just run a black and white here on this image. So we've got that. If you want to edit the underlying layers, you can't double click to open them. You can only change the layer name. So in order to open that, you're going to run this Open Folder Groups action. And you can see that opens up your folder and gives you access to these layers. So if you wanted to paint on the layer mask, you could. For instance, with a black paintbrush, I could remove the black and white effect from my subject and just real lightly paint in some color back to her. I'm going to actually paint it in full strength with a full opacity brush. So we've got a black and white background and a full color subject. So you could do something like that if you wanted to. Also for the eyes, if you run eye everything, I'm just going to delete these two layers and remove the black and white. If you run eye everything, you'll definitely need to use this open folder action. So you can see the layers, you can see the elements, puts them in a group, and then to ungroup them, you'll run that action. Now, if you do have one of these prior versions of Elements, in order to look at the effects of the action as a whole, kind of a before and after, you will hold down your Alt or Option button and click on the eyeball next to background, and you can see that that turns off all the layers at once. If you need to adjust the strength or the opacity, you can do that layer by layer. Okay, so that's the Rustic Chic actions in Photoshop Elements. I hope you love them. Thanks so much for watching this video.